Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading some articles out of History Magazine. Now, these articles were chosen by my channel members. The ones that we are going to read tonight were chosen by Striker, Pamela, Laura, Cater Gator, and Jorge. Thank you so much for that. If you would like to choose future History Magazine articles, you can click the little join button right down there or the link in the description. My memberships are only 99 US cents a month, the lowest I can possibly make them. And there's lots of other little perks you get when you're a channel member. So, with that being said, our articles this month are going to be about the Sphinx, guardian of Giza, and then we're going to read about the Tower of London and the Forbidden City. So our theme tonight is famous structures around the world. Check out the cover of this, I want to say monthly, bi-monthly issue of the Sphinx here being uncovered still. You can see the legs are still swallowed up by sand in this picture. These people are just hanging out on it. How fun is that? Very old photograph here and really neat compared to how the Sphinx looks now. So let's get into it. Let's learn more about the Sphinx. Great Sphinx of Giza. There it is, looking out at the landscape, the pyramids in the background. Let's see. With the body of a lion and the face of a king, the Great Sphinx has become an instantly recognizable symbol of ancient Egypt, inspiring grand replicas all over the world, from Las Vegas to Lanzhou, China. For thousands of years, this massive monument has lain at the feet of the pyramids of Giza, guarding the necropolis. The Sphinx's popularity rose and fell, much like the desert sands that engulfed it during periods of neglect. When the Sphinx would re-emerge, it aroused curiosity and wonder in those who gazed upon its colossal form. Desert Colossus. Archaeologists believe that the Great Sphinx was built during Egypt's Old Kingdom by the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khafre. It is one of the world's oldest works of monumental sculpture and one of the largest. It measures more than 65 feet tall from the base to the top of its head and 240 feet long from forepaws to tail. Much of the Sphinx was carved directly from the limestone rock of Giza and then supplemented with more limestone blocks. The Sphinx's head has a royal look and bears some traditional symbols of ancient Egypt's monarchy. It wears the nemes, a cloth headdress worn by Egyptian pharaohs. The remains of a carved royal cobra, or uraeus, can be seen on the Sphinx's forehead. The human facial features are masculine. Time has robbed the Sphinx of its nose and kingly beard, but the rest of its features remain well defined despite erosion. 2 massive paws stretch out before the Sphinx's leonine body. A tail wraps around it. Much of the body was once faced with high-quality limestone blocks from the quarry at Tura. This surface layer has deteriorated over time. Some has been entirely lost in places despite restoration projects over the centuries. Archaeologists have found traces of blue, yellow, and red pigments on parts of the Sphinx, making it likely that it was once colorfully decorated. Writing in the 1st century CE, Roman author Pliny the Elder described the Sphinx's vivid appearance. The face of the monster is colored red. Riddles of the Sphinx. In ancient Greece, a sphinx was a monster with a woman's head, a lion's body, and a bird's wings. She was dangerous and would kill any person who couldn't answer her riddles, most famously in the myth of Oedipus. Her Egyptian cousin, however, was a benevolent, protective being who guarded kings and country. The word sphinx is of uncertain origin. It may be derived from the Egyptian term sheshep ankh, which means living image, and was used to refer to depictions of a god or pharaoh. Unlike the Greek monster, the Great Sphinx has a man's head and lacks wings. Other depictions of sphinxes appear in different eras of ancient Egypt, and while the lion's body remains consistent, the heads change. In addition to human heads, there are also animal ones, including rams, jackals, falcons, and crocodiles. These kinds of statues are often found as part of Egypt's sacred spaces. A pair of 13th century BCE falcon-headed sphinxes were found at Ramses II's temple at Abu Simbel. Another example is Luxor's Avenue of Sphinxes. Built in the 4th century BCE, they still stand guard along a nearly 1.5-mile road that connected the temples of Karnak and Luxor. While the Sphinx has spent 4,500 years watching the centuries pass, attitudes toward the giant wonder have greatly changed over the years. In the Old Kingdom, the Sphinx was worshipped and was regarded as part of the sacred landscape of the Giza necropolis. When new regimes took over, it was abandoned. Desert sands blew in and covered it up until only its head was visible. Over time, visitors to Giza would rediscover the Sphinx as it sat patiently waiting to be noticed. The Colossus would be reborn as it emerged from the sand, and new visitors would flock to marvel at its size, mystery, and endurance. Look at this great photo here of the Sphinx with the pyramid in the background. That's really cool. I like this article because the rest of it is just little mini articles about the Sphinx. Really, really cool. So let's get into it. Who built the Sphinx? Two of the biggest mysteries surrounding the Sphinx of Giza are when it was built and by whom. Scholarly consensus is that it was constructed some 4,500 years ago during the Old Kingdom while the Great Pyramids were being built. The Sphinx and these massive tombs are definitely connected. The giant guardian appears to sit right between two of them, each erected by a different 4th dynasty pharaoh. Khufu, who reigned around 2500 BCE, built the Great Pyramid, and his son Khafre built his own slightly smaller yet still impressive tomb. As grand as the pyramids of these early Old Kingdom rulers are, records of these pharaohs are scant. Archaeologists have had to resort to detective work when trying to solve the mystery of who built the Sphinx. To date, no smoking gun has been found, or inscriptions that credit either Khufu or Khafre. The most popular hypothesis, held by Egyptologists like Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass, is that Khafre commissioned the Sphinx as part of his monumental building projects, including his resting place and the surrounding temple complex. These scholars have studied the remains of the necropolis and the various structures each king commissioned there. The Sphinx's positioning within Khafre's scheme for his pyramid and mortuary temples is a better fit, suggesting careful planning and logic. They believe that the Sphinx itself was carved from a massive piece of limestone, which was likely exposed as workers were quarrying big pieces of rock for the construction of nearby temples. Some have proposed a much earlier dating based on the Inventory Stele, a text from circa 670 BCE, millennia after the events it describes. It suggests that the Sphinx was restored in the time of Khufu, implying that the monument existed before these early pharaohs. This stele, however, is full of anachronisms, leading many experts to treat the text with a healthy dose of skepticism. Here you can see a nice shot of the Sphinx there among the pyramids. So you can kind of see like the scope of this archaeological site. It's a cool diagram. We'll go through it while we're reading about it. Temple of the Sphinx. Opposite the Great Sphinx are the remains of a temple that was likely begun at the same time as the gigantic sculpture. Although the building was never completed, it is believed to have been consecrated. Archaeologists have found representations of different aspects of the solar divinity Ra. The Sphinx, located behind the sanctuary, would have formed part of this sacred complex. Excavations in the early 20th century revealed the ruins of the temple's megalithic limestone blocks. It was likely that these would have been faced with granite. The floor was made of alabaster. According to German Egyptologists Herbert Ricke and Siegfried Schott, the 24 columns within the temple's central courtyard may represent the 24 hours of the day. Statues of the pharaoh could have been placed against them. An altar stood in the center. The temple had two sanctuaries, an eastern one and a western one. The first may have been dedicated to the morning sun god Khepri, and the second to the evening sun god Atum. It's likely that both sanctuaries were enclosed, while the central area would have been open to the sky. At midday, it would have let the light of the mighty sun god Ra shine in at the zenith of its daily course. During the equinoxes, an astronomical solar alignment can be observed among the Temple of the Sphinx itself, and Khafre's pyramid. An observer standing on the east-west axis of the temple and looking toward the setting sun in the west would see the equinoctial sun set on the south side of the Sphinx and Khafre's pyramid. Scholars point to this phenomenon to support the theory that Khafre built the Sphinx. About 1,000 years later, Pharaoh Amenhotep II of the 18th dynasty built another small temple near the ruins of Khafre's complex. The new kingdom structure is made from adobe bricks and sits next to the northeast corner of the Sphinx's temple. It was dedicated to the god Har-em-Akhet, Horus on the horizon, who was then associated with the Sphinx. Let's take a look at the diagram. We've got, number 1, the ceremonial causeway right here. It says the long covered pathway linked Khafre's Valley Temple with his High Temple, located next to his pyramid. The funeral procession bore Khafre's body along this path. Number 2 here, this is the Valley Temple. It says also called the Lower Temple. This building had a room decorated with statues of Khafre. It's believed that the king's body was embalmed here after his death. Number 3 is the Sphinx itself. Traces of pigments found on the body and head of the Sphinx have led Egyptologists to believe that it was colorfully painted in its prime. And here is the Temple of the Sphinx. Although it was never finished, the sanctuary was built from locally quarried limestone, similar to that of the Great Sphinx and Khafre's other temples. That's a beautiful picture, isn't it? Let's see, this is a photo for National Geographic in 1913. You can see that it's pretty covered. You can't see its legs at all. The Prince's Dream. Following the decline of the Old Kingdom, the Sphinx and the structures around it were abandoned and fell into ruin. They lay dormant for centuries as the desert sands piled up around them. The Sphinx would be reborn during the New Kingdom when a young pharaoh used the Sphinx to tie his reign to the kings of old. Standing between the paws of the Sphinx is the dream stela of Tutmos IV. Discovered in 1817, the stela was a late addition to the Sphinx complex, installed sometime during the 18th dynasty. The dream stela is a massive piece of solid granite, weighing some 15 tons and standing about 12 feet tall. Its ornately carved inscriptions relate an episode from the life of Pharaoh Tutmos IV, the 8th king of the 18th dynasty, when he was a young prince and the Sphinx was buried up to its shoulders in sand. According to the stela, Tutmos took a noonday nap in the shadow of the great Sphinx, and the sun god Horemheb appeared in the form of the Sphinx. The god told the prince that if he cleared the sands from the statue, then he would make Tutmos king. The end of the story has been lost to time as the inscription has been worn away. Tutmos IV used the account of the dream to legitimize himself as king. He had not been first in line to succeed his father, Amenhotep II. The dream, whether real or not, helped serve as propaganda to link the new pharaoh to the divine and his ancient royal heritage. The pharaoh then began a restoration project of the Sphinx, helping it re-emerge from the sand. As part of this restoration, scholars believe that Tutmos IV had a stone-braided beard attached to the Sphinx's chin. The facial hair fell off, but fragments of it were discovered in 1817. And here you can see the dream stela, which I never knew existed before reading this article. Apparently, when you see the Sphinx, the stela is there talking about the dream of Tutmos IV. How interesting is that? Wear and tear. Following a great revival of interest during the New Kingdom, the Sphinx fell into another long period of neglect. The sands built up until only its head could be seen. Despite its semi-burial, the Sphinx still exuded power. In the 12th and 13th centuries, locals were recorded making offerings to the Sphinx to flood the Nile and boost harvests. In the 11th century, the North African geographer Al-Idrisi reported that those who wished to obtain positions in the Fatimid Caliphate, based in Egypt, presented themselves to the Sphinx. The monument exerted a major fascination over European visitors. The French explorer André Thevet described the Sphinx in his Cosmography of the Levant, published in 1556, as the head of a colossus. 2 centuries later, in the late 1790s, when Napoleon's forces fought the British in Egypt, the French became fascinated with ancient Egyptian history and its sites, including the Sphinx. When he saw it and the pyramids, Napoleon allegedly exclaimed, "Thousands of years of history are looking down upon us." Ancient Egypt so inspired Napoleon's followers that when they returned to France, they embarked on the creation of an extensive multi-volume history of ancient Egypt, with detailed renderings of all they had encountered. A fanciful story arose out of Napoleon's time in Egypt regarding the Sphinx's nose, or lack thereof. Tradition claims that French troops shot off the nose, leaving the Sphinx disfigured. Despite the story's staying power, it is not true. Danish explorer Frederick Louis Norden visited France in 1737, well before Napoleon's excursion, and extensively documented his trip. His 1755 book, Voyage to Egypt and Nubia, features a sketch of the noseless Great Sphinx, indicating that the appendage had gone missing before the late 1790s. An Islamic source reported that the Sphinx's nose was removed in the late 14th century. The medieval Egyptian historian al-Makrizi wrote that a Sufi Muslim, Muhammad Sa'im al-Dahr, offended by local people worshipping the Sphinx, chiseled the nose off. Unlike the Sphinx's beard, fragments of the statue's broken nose have never been found, but Egyptologist and Sphinx expert Mark Lehner believes the existing evidence supports an intentional break, as the account describes, rather than gradual decline and fall. It's a pretty painting up here from the 19th century, and you can see just how much of the Sphinx is buried. It's almost all the way up to its neck. Resurfacing. Attempts to dig out the Sphinx met with little success at first. In 1817, Italian Egyptologist Giovanni Battista Caviglia managed to clear the front end. At the end of the 19th century, the Sphinx's broad chest and massive paws could be seen. More progress followed in the subsequent decades until finally, in the late 1930s, all the sand was swept away and the full Sphinx was on display. Since then, archaeologists have gone beyond the surface to find deeper secrets. Led by Egyptologist Mark Lehner, the American Research Center in Egypt conducted an intensive mapping project of the entire Sphinx complex. It revealed new insights into the monument's construction, which will help conservationists preserve it. There's a photograph of it from the 1920s. You can see the progress they're making. And here's what it looks like today. And look how interesting you can see the wear and tear. Like, here's the arms are all smooth. And up here it's all kind of rough and rocky. You can see its tail right there, its back feet. It's all this worn away rock. Very interesting. I think that's the end. Yeah, that's the end of the Sphinx article. So cool. I learned a lot about the Sphinx from this article. Let's read about the Tower of London, which is exciting because I've been to the Tower of London. It's a very fascinating place. Tower of London. There it is. The old tower there. Guardian of Britain. And this came out last October, so it starts off with Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress of the Tower of London. How aptly the title states the major roles of this iconic structure. Rising next to the River Thames, it was once the largest non-ecclesiastical building in England and a focus of power for each new monarch. Over the centuries, the structure has been renovated, enlarged, and enhanced. As the architecture has changed, so has the tower's purpose. It's been a fortress, a prison, and a palace. It served as the royal mint, displayed a menagerie of exotic animals, housed the crown jewels, and become the home of the 6 royal ravens, whose presence, tradition says, keeps the kingdom from falling. Fortress on the Thames. The Tower of London's origins go back to 1066. After defeating Harold II, last Saxon king of England, at the Battle of Hastings, William I of England, known as William the Conqueror, needed to consolidate his hold over his new kingdom. He doled out responsibility for conquered lands to his favorite nobles, a successful practice from wars in Normandy and elsewhere. They would build motte and bailey forts. A ditch was dug in the strategically appropriate spot, with dirt piled up to make or add to a hill or the motte. On top, soldiers erected a wooden tower or barracks, housing not only the fort's battalion, but weapons, horses, food, and valuables. This barracks became a refuge if outer defenses were breached. Around the hill, just inside the ditch, soldiers erected a palisade. The area within it, the bailey, had room for sinking a water well, raising a few crops, feeding livestock, practicing combat, and maintaining weapons. The Normans became so adept at this that they could build one in a week. 12 years after Hastings, William I wanted something more impressive to stake his claim to Saxon lands and intimidate hostile subjects. His fort at the bend of the Thames just outside the London city limits would become a castle. Gundulf, a clergyman adept at designing castles and churches in France, was installed as Bishop of Rochester in 1077 and then charged by William with designing the new fortress castle. It would become known as the White Tower, although it was not whitewashed until the 1200s. Nearly square, 107 feet by 118 feet, and nearly 90 feet high, with 15-foot thick walls tapering to 10 feet. The tower did not so much rise as thrust itself up, visible from nearly every part of London and from several miles away. It had 3 floors. The cellar was used for storage. The first floor served many different purposes. There were living quarters, a large refectory for soldiers' meals and entertainment, a small dormitory, and the beautiful Romanesque chapel of St. John. The second floor's 3 rooms were for the constable, the tower's commander, a great hall for banquets or other state occasions, the chapel gallery, and one space for bedroom, meeting room, and living quarters. Others who might also use this space included the king, important guests, or state prisoners. The tower took 20 years to build, and William did not live to see it completed. No sooner was it finished than Gundulf began a stone curtain wall enclosing land between the tower and the Thames, the first among many renovations. After changes by Henry III and Edward I, the tower and its liberties assumed today's basic design. The central white tower, surrounded by 2 curtain walls, Gundulf's earliest, innermost wall has long since disappeared. With their 20 towers and a wide grassy strip sweeping around the site's 3 sides that are not bordered by the river. English royals began using the site as a residence after a sumptuous palace was built between the southerly wall of the tower and Gundulf's curtain wall. Built and embellished by Henry III and Edward I in the 1200s, this palace became a residence of convenience, Edward staying only 53 days of his 35-year reign, or necessity, if a king needed refuge from enemies or an aroused populace. By the 1500s, the Tower Palace was no longer a home. Henry VII abandoned it after losing his firstborn son, Arthur. Perhaps his most enduring contribution to the tower was founding the Yeomen of the Guard, direct ancestors of the Yeoman Warders, current caretakers and guides. Instead, the site would take on the function that would give it such notoriety in British history: a prison. Royal prisoners. The 1500s were not the first time the Tower of London had held prisoners. 2 of the Tower's earliest captives were prisoners of state, John the Good, King of France, captured during the Battle of Poitiers in September 1356, and Charles, Duke of Orleans, captured at Agincourt in October 1415. The fate of two of the youngest English subjects would later become the center of a tragic mystery, the fate of the princes in the Tower. After King Edward IV died on April 9th, 1483, his will named Richard, Duke of Gloucester, Lord Protector of his son and heir, the 12-year-old Edward. Gloucester had Edward and his 9-year-old brother Richard, Duke of York, sent to the Tower in May and June respectively, ostensibly to await the young king's coronation as Edward V. But the young heir would never take the throne. Perhaps spurred on by Gloucester himself, Parliament declared the two princes illegitimate, and then confirmed Gloucester as King Richard III on June 26, 1483. The two young princes were never seen alive again. Many historians speculate that the two boys were murdered in the Tower during the summer of 1483. When skeletons of two children were discovered under a tower stairway in 1674, they were believed to be those of Edward V and the Duke of York. In 1678, the remains were interred in Westminster Abbey in a monument designed by Christopher Wren. Among the Tower's most famous prisoners were those incarcerated by King Henry VIII. Thomas More found that it did not matter if he was once the king's best friend and chancellor. When Henry sought to divorce Catherine of Aragon and separated from the Catholic Church, More refused to acknowledge the king as the supreme head of the Church of England at the end of his first marriage. More was dismissed from office, arrested, removed from his family and home, and imprisoned in the Tower. He was convicted of treason and executed on Tower Hill, just outside the walls of the Tower of London, in July 1535. Henry VIII's other famous guests of the Tower of London included two of his wives. Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, had borne him one daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, but no sons, leading Henry to desire a new wife, Jane Seymour. He had Anne arrested for treason, held in the Tower, and executed there in May 1536. Henry's fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was also held briefly at the Tower prior to her execution there for adultery in 1542. The Tower saw plenty of use as a prison in the turbulent years following Henry's death as Catholics and Protestants fought for control of England. The sickly 9-year-old son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, King Edward VI, had been raised a Protestant. In 1553, at age 15, Edward and his advisors created his device for the succession, in which he disinherited his Catholic half-sister Mary and his Protestant half-sister Elizabeth. Instead, his crown would pass down through his aunt's line to her granddaughter Jane Grey, a Protestant. But no one told 17-year-old Jane, who only discovered the situation 3 days after Edward's death on July 6, 1553. She reluctantly accepted and was proclaimed queen on July 10th. What little support Queen Jane had, including that of her entire Privy Council, evaporated in just 9 days. Henry VIII's oldest child, the Catholic Mary, was chosen as the next monarch by the Privy Council. Jane, known to posterity as the 9-Day Queen, was imprisoned in the Tower on July 19th. In September, Parliament officially declared Mary the Queen and Jane Grey a usurper. Her trial was delayed until November, but both guilty verdict and death sentence were quickly handed down. Although Queen Mary was reluctant to sign Jane's death warrant, she was finally persuaded that Jane remained a threat. Jane Grey was beheaded on Tower Green on February 12th, 1554. Queen Mary's fears about usurpers were not calmed by Jane's execution. She imprisoned her younger half-sister, Princess Elizabeth, the future Elizabeth I, whom Mary believed was the focus of nobles plotting against her. For 2 months in spring 1554, the 20-year-old Elizabeth was kept under house arrest in the Tower. She resided in the same quarters where her mother, Anne Boleyn, had lived before her death. For exercise, she was allowed access to the rooftop, still named Princess Elizabeth's Walk. Finding no evidence of treason, Queen Mary moved her from the Tower to house arrest elsewhere in England. Mary died in November 1558, and Elizabeth took the throne. The new queen continued to use the Tower to hold enemies of the crown, as would her successors. From Walter Raleigh to Guy Fawkes, the high-profile prisoners and deaths at the Tower would burnish its notorious reputation for centuries. One of the last foreign state prisoners was an American, Henry Lawrence. A South Carolinian, he served in the Continental Congress and then as envoy to the Dutch Republic. Sailing to Holland, Lawrence's ship was stopped by a Royal Navy vessel. So you guys can see. His identity confirmed, he was arrested, taken to England, charged with treason, and sent to the Tower in October 1780. He was greeted with a rousing chorus of Yankee Doodle from the yeoman warders. The only American ever to have been held in the Tower, Lawrence was released and exchanged in 1782 for Lord Cornwallis, the British commander who surrendered to the American colonists. Imposing icon. Today, the Tower has become one of London's most famous tourist attractions. Visitors can gaze upon the crown jewels of the United Kingdom, including the coronation regalia, which is worn only at a new monarch's investiture, and the ceremonial regalia, worn for the state opening of Parliament. Another popular sight at the Tower are its most famous modern residents, the Ravens. According to tradition, King Charles II claimed that if ever the ravens leave the Tower, the kingdom will fall. At least 6 ravens live at the Tower and are cared for by yeoman warder, the Raven Master, who also clips the birds' wings to prevent them from flying too far. Through World War I, then the relentless Nazi bombing of London during the Blitz of World War II, the ravens showed no sign of leaving. Any tour of the Tower cannot mention all the people whose histories form part of its nearly 1,000-year legacy. Men and women, royal or commoner, foreigner or English citizen, those who were imprisoned there all played a part in the Tower of London's story. Beyond the glittering jewels and the ebony ravens are humbler sights that can connect visitors with these people. In chambers like the Beauchamp Tower, prisoners carved graffiti into the walls, leaving behind their names, proclamations, and pictures, lasting memorials to their time in the Tower of London. Now, the diagram on the previous page is not actually terribly exciting, but I like this big painting here where you can see the tower right there. And then there's a picture over here. It's kind of hard to see. Let me bring it closer, where you can see some of the graffiti on the walls there. Very, very cool. Let's head into the last article here about the Forbidden City. This one does have some really cool diagrams, so don't worry. Look at this. Like, wow. It's a painting of the Forbidden City. Here we go. In the heart of modern Beijing is the world's largest palace complex, big enough to hold 50 Buckingham Palaces and covering more than 7.75 million square feet. Known as the Forbidden City, it served as the symbolic and political center of Imperial China between 1420 and 1912. Its forbidding moniker reflected how most subjects of the realm were never allowed to enter its walls. Hold on, you can't tell what I'm doing, but I'm gonna move closer so I can read this a little easier. Okay. The entire complex is filled with palaces, gardens, courtyards, and living quarters. It was built by the Yongle Emperor, the third Ming ruler. He declared himself emperor and consolidated his power in Beijing, moving the capital some 620 miles from Nanjing in 1403. Sources say it took 100,000 artisans and 1 million forced laborers to build the Beijing complex between 1406 and 1420 on the site where Kublai Khan had once built his famous palace. The Forbidden City's name in Chinese, Zijiancheng, literally means purple forbidden city. The color purple is considered auspicious in Chinese culture and symbolizes divinity and immortality, as well as the North Star. The Forbidden City would be the home and seat of power for 24 rulers, 14 from the Ming Dynasty and 10 from the Qing. When the Manchu Qing emperors overthrew the Ming, they added new structures and gardens, but the complex's importance remained undiminished. Sacred geometry. The Forbidden City forms a rectangle over half a mile long by almost half a mile wide. Its outer wall is more than 25 feet high and surrounded by a moat with an artificial water source, the Golden River. The layout follows the principles of feng shui, the art of placing objects and buildings to promote positive energy. The palace complex is aligned north-south and is symmetrical to emulate the balance of the universe. Tradition says that its design famously incorporates 9,999.5 rooms. Only the celestial Lord of Heaven, not his imperial son on earth, could enjoy 10,000. Nonetheless, the number 9,999 is auspicious in Chinese culture, associated with the emperor, and pronounced the same as the Chinese word eternal. The key spaces within the Forbidden City are distributed along a central axis that bisects the grounds. Seen from above, the complex forms a shape that aligns with the ideal cosmic order in Confucian ideology, referring to the center point between north, south, east, and west. At this central point stands the Hall of Supreme Harmony, housing the main imperial seat known as the Dragon Throne. By placing this at the Forbidden City's epicenter, the emperor was symbolically transformed into the very center of the universe, the focus for all social and natural hierarchy around which the entire empire revolved. A Chinese tradition held that those who are located in the north, facing the south, have a superior position, just as those inside a building or in an elevated space are superior to those outside or in a lower space. They have the high ground. These spatial relationships were reflected explicitly in the architecture of the Forbidden City. The emperor always stood inside a gateway or in an elevated room looking toward the south from above, while his subjects stood below in open courtyards looking north toward the emperor. Okay. The emperor's private rooms are located in the inner court at the north end. Besides himself, only women and eunuchs were permitted access. State rooms where the emperor granted audiences and did official work with his ministers are to the south in the outer court. It was here that the Chinese imperial court managed its contact with the outside world, using the Forbidden City's magnificent architecture as a stage to showcase the emperor's power. Ceremonies and rituals. Riddles. Within Chinese imperial tradition, the emperor was considered the only official inhabitant of the Forbidden City. Ministers and nobles who represented the people were seen as mere visitors. This distinction was significant when organizing ceremonies such as the emperor's ascension to the throne, the great audiences that he held, celebrations of his birthday, and issuing government decrees. These kinds of ceremonies followed the same ritual organization. The emperor would lead the way to the place where the ceremony was to take place, with his officials and nobles following through doors and crossing bridges in strict order of social hierarchy. At no point was anyone allowed to stand to the north of the emperor. Historical descriptions of the imperial audiences reflect how the social order was emphasized through strict protocols. Attendees would gather at dawn in the exterior courtyard of the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Relatives of the emperor stood on the steps leading up to the hall, placed according to the closeness of their blood ties with the emperor. Military and civil officers formed rows in the outer court, again according to their rank. All faced north toward the emperor, who, dressed in imperial finery, decorated with the figure of a dragon, was led to the throne by a procession. Once all were in place, at the shouted signal kowtow, the attendees knelt down and paid homage to the emperor by touching their heads to the ground 3 times in 3 sequences of 3 prostrations. The emperor attended the most important ceremonies in person. Even when he was absent, the dragon throne was still revered and treated as his proxy. Similarly, when the emperor issued a decree, the imperial document itself was treated with great pomp. Each of these ceremonies emphasized, through ritual, a way of understanding the universe in clearly defined hierarchical strata. The Forbidden City reinforced each dynasty's power and control. The modern Forbidden City. Despite centuries of challenges, from extreme political upheaval and brutal war to major conflagrations, the palace complex still stands. After the fall of the Qing dynasty, the last Chinese emperor, Puyi, lived in the Forbidden City until 1924, when he was finally expelled from the complex by warlord and later Nationalist Party officer Feng Yuxiang. The next year, the Republic of China made the site a national museum. In 1949, while standing atop the Gate of Heavenly Peace, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. During the Cultural Revolution in 1966, Mao ordered Red Guards posted at this gate. In 1987, the Forbidden City was named part of a joint UNESCO World Heritage Site. The imperial palaces of the Ming and Qing dynasties at Beijing and Shenyang. In spring 1989, the world's attention was riveted by pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square, the world's largest public space, in the Forbidden City's long shadow. I didn't know Tiananmen Square is the world's largest public gathering place. That's pretty neat. The Northwest Tower, it says. And here is our diagram. We're going to take a walk through the city, starting with the Meridian gates. Here it is. Okay. My phone died. I'm filming this on like a different day, so if things look different, I'm sorry, but let's read about the Meridian gate. It says, Wufeng Lao, with a 5 phoenix tower, is the imposing southern entrance to the Forbidden City. It is also known as the Meridian Gate because it was believed that the Meridian line passed through the palace complex. The emperor issued his imperial decrees in this most auspicious place. The gate is set in the external wall's center and has a lateral wing extending out on either side. Its design follows the tower style used to decorate entrances of palaces, temples, and tombs in the Zhao dynasty. 5 doors open through the Meridian Gate's tower for access to the complex. The center door was solely the emperor's. The only exceptions were for the empress on her wedding day and for the top 3 national exam scholars. Standing almost 125 feet high, the central structure is about 200 feet long and has a double roof of glazed tiles. At each end are stands of bells and drums. Whenever the emperor left the Forbidden City to go to the sacrificial altar of heaven, bells would ring. When the most important ceremonies were celebrated in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, drumming would join the bell ringing. Big famous gate here. Let's see, we are heading up next to the Golden River and the Gate of Supreme Harmony. This big old artificial river crossing the Golden River. According to the principles of feng shui, every mountain must have water flowing before it. The area that lies beyond the Meridian Gate adheres to this principle. The courtyard there is divided from west to east by the Golden River, which flows in front of the monumental Gate of Supreme Harmony. The artificial river enters the city from the northwest and flows out into the moat at the southeast. Measuring about 15 feet wide, the Golden River is shallow, but its waters had a practical as well as a symbolic purpose. The river was a reservoir in case of fire, a serious threat for a city made largely of wood. Where the Golden River passes in front of the Gate of Supreme Harmony, it is shaped like a Mongol arch. There are 5 bridges across the river, each symbolizing one of the 5 Confucian virtues expected of the emperor's subjects. Let's read the English. Benevolence, righteousness, wisdom, trustworthiness, and ritual propriety. The 5 bridges are like 5 arrows that cause these virtues to emanate from the imperial center out into the world. In addition to their symbolic value, the bridges were used to underscore the culture's strict social hierarchy. The central bridge could only be crossed by the emperor. The 2 flanking it were used by the royal family, and the outermost 2 were for the court officials. Next on our map, we head up to this complex here. We're going to read about the Sacred Halls of Harmony. There we go. The Sacred Halls of Harmony. In the center of the Forbidden City, raised on a 3-tiered white marble terrace, stand the complex's 3 most important buildings: the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the Hall of Central Harmony, and the Hall of Preserving Harmony. All 3 halls in the outer court are roofed with yellow glazed tiles, yellow being the imperial color. Each hall has a throne from which the emperor presided over ceremonies and celebrations. The most important was the Hall of Supreme Harmony, which housed the dragon throne. Auspicious public rituals took place here, including enthronements and royal weddings. The smaller, brighter Hall of Central Harmony to the north was used for imperial acts such as receiving obeisance or examining government documents. Farther north is the Hall of Preserving Harmony, a name that alluded to the imperial function of sharing harmony under heaven. It was used under the Ming as the emperor's place to don ceremonial clothes. Under the Qing, it was the setting for banquets with heads of state, nobles, and ministers. There's a diagram here of what it would look like bisected. Let's read more about the dragon throne in this building, in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. realm of the dragon. Dragons in many cultures are seen as fire-breathing monsters, but Chinese dragons are powerful, benevolent bringers of life, supreme creatures who control the waters and rains. Throughout Chinese history, the dragon has also been associated with imperial power, going back to the first emperor of unified China, Qin Shi Huangdi. The relationship between emperors and dragons is made plain inside the Hall of Supreme Harmony, where the dragon throne sits. The Ming Dynasty's Jiaqing emperor is believed to have been the first ruler to use it. Surrounded by dragons, the elevated throne is ornately decorated with gold and precious stones. 5 coiled dragons appear on the back, representing the 5 elements, which are metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Behind it is a carved panel depicting 9 dragons. Just above, the image of a coiled dragon adorns the intricately coffered ceiling. When an emperor, clad in ceremonial robes, decorated with the dragon emblem, took his place on the throne, he was seen as being at the epicenter not just of China, but of the civilized world. This reflects the fact that China is called Zhongguo, Central State, or Middle Kingdom. Very, very cool. Do you see all the dragons? Very cool. Lastly, we're going to look at... Oh no, there's 2 more. Second to last, we're going to look at the Imperial Garden, which is right behind all of these halls here. The Imperial Garden. Isn't that lovely? Strolling in the Imperial Garden. To the north of the palace complex is an ornamental garden of bamboos, cypresses, and pines, dotted with structures including small pavilions. The Imperial Garden was originally built in the 15th century during the reign of the Yongle Emperor to be enjoyed by the supreme ruler and his royal wife. Designed to be a peaceful space to connect with nature, the garden was later expanded to cover almost 10 acres. It is one of 4 gardens in the palace complex and has 4 pavilions in its corners, representing the 4 seasons. One of them, the Pavilion of 10,000 Springs, is dedicated to spring. Its square base represents the earth, while its rounded roof is heaven adorned by dragons and phoenixes. In the center of this tranquil setting stands the Hall of Imperial Peace, a Taoist temple where the Ming emperors practiced alchemy and divination. The main hall was dedicated to Xuanwu, a powerful Taoist warrior god associated with the north and with water. This hall is the only Taoist temple located on the main axis of the Forbidden City. Another notable building in the garden is the Bower of Crimson Snow, named for blossoms of the flowering crabapple trees that once grew there. Their falling blossoms are said to resemble reddish snowflakes. Today, mock oranges, whose flowers are white, are planted there. 2 Qing emperors in particular, Kangxi and Qianlong, appreciated the beauty of the pergola so keenly that they considered it their favorite place to compose poetry. This is the Pavilion of 10,000 Springs. You can see that rounded roof there. And now, lastly, we're going to look at the Gate of Divine Prowess. We're traveling all the way up. We're at the other end of the city at this gate. Which I don't remember if I said this before. That's the gate you know. This is the big famous one that you've seen. Surely, if you've seen anything about the Forbidden City, this is the gate. Built in 1420, the Gate of Divine Prowess is the northern entrance to the Forbidden City. It opened into the emperor's private residence and was used by palace workers, the emperor's concubines, and members of the royal family. Originally named the Black Tortoise Gate, The gate received a name change in the 1600s because the birth name of the Qing dynasty's Kangxi emperor was Xuanyue. Naming anything sounding too much like the emperor's name was taboo. The Gate of Divine Prowess is rectangular, stands 102 feet high, and has 3 doors. It has a shumi base made of white jade for a Buddhist tower. A tower tops the gate with a roof of brightly glazed yellow tiles. A bell and a drum were kept in the tower. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, the bell would be struck 108 times at dusk. Then the bell and the drum would sound once every 2 hours from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. At dawn, the bell would be struck again, but when the emperor was home, only the drum would be beaten. In 1924, the last Qing emperor Puyi was finally expelled through this gate. When the complex became a museum in 1925, a palace museum sign was hung above it. They're like, just this is a museum now. How incredible. So pretty. But that is all that I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this style of video to be your cup of tea, please consider subscribing. I'm actually going to do another history magazine video for you in a few weeks, so be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good night. Good night.